Hello again, everyone. This is a video to walk you through the way you should think about your exam, your second exam in our class. Remember, there are a total of 4 exams, and I do drop your lowest exam score and replace it with your highest. Many of you did very well on the first exam. Some of you did moderately so, and some of you struggled. This little tutorial is designed for all of you. And I will, in just a minute, share my screen and we'll talk about the midterm study guide and the modules tested. But before I do that, let me emphasize that the nature of this exam is designed, and all of the exams in our class are designed for an asynchronous format. Asynchronous means we have no face-to-face meetings. There's no way for me to take, or for you to take an exam in a controlled setting like a classroom. And it's open book, essentially. You have all of your resources around you, which is wonderful, but that means the exam approaches learning differently. So the study guide is your tool to go back through the module, each of the modules tested, and make sure that you understand both the big picture points that you have, that each module is focused on, as well as specific images, specific terms, and specific questions. And the study guide is organized module to module to help you do that very systematically. This is a great way to go back into these modules and really revisit what you've already studied and synthesize it. Our brain loves to revisit what it's already been introduced to. It's its happy place. And so that is why the study guide appears now and why I'm providing it at all. It's to guide you and help. It's your it's the final process for you that you learn. Not a process. It's one of the steps in the process of learning. Is the study guide itself. The exam too, I like to say, is our last chance to learn. So for those of you who are working very hard, you've gone deeply into the class. For those of you who have prioritized other classes or have fallen, you feel maybe a bit behind, the exam is your last chance to learn. It's not, and so yes, it's testing you, but it's also teaching you, and it's teaching all of you. So I want you to think about the exam in this way. And I hope, of course, eat something that's nourishing, be well rested, try to create a kind of space around you that is free of distractions, let people around you know what you're doing, and so that you can really flourish and take as much as you can from our class. And in this way, it's more likely to stay with you as a kind of treasure inside of you of knowledge in your future. And that's the whole point, right? So now let me share my study guide, our study guide with you. So here is our module, and I'm going to put it quickly in student view here. Okay, so remember, of course, you can find them. You should be checking in every week, several times, reviewing and studying our module material. Every week, a module opens on Monday. Now, I want to call your attention to the fact that your first midterm, which was due on September 22nd, that module with tips and guidelines appeared after your week 4 content. And so you'll need to scroll back before midterm 1 to be sure that you review week 4. You remember, just like this week, you're going into Asia, China, and it's week 8, but you will not be tested on that. You were tested on the material just prior to the week that you're taking the exam. So that's just kind of to help you when you're scrolling. So the exam covers week 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, one of the most basic ways that you can help your brain prepare is to force yourself to just look at the heading of the module, the name of it, and maybe on a piece of paper, try to test yourself. What does this mean? Indo-Aryan and Vedic period. What are some of the major kind of points that were made in this module? Then you can look at the page titles themselves. Introduction to the Vedas, reading the Rig Veda. Don't open them up hopefully you've already done so. Ask yourself what you know, then go in and look at the pages. And you should approach learning in all of your classes this way, moving from the biggest possible picture, like a tree, without leaves, without fruit, just kind of getting the structure. And then when you add more details like leaves, fruits, and flowers, say on our metaphorical tree, your brain understands where it belongs better. If you're a nervous student, a hardworking student, and you go in right to like details with great diligence, your brain doesn't learn as well as when you step back and see what these small parts relate to. And the module, its structure is designed to help your brain do that. So step back and test yourself before even reviewing and opening the pages. And that should take, I don't know, like 15, 20 minutes. See kind of, and you'll see, oh, I don't know what that means. That's a clue that you maybe, this is an area you need to focus on. Okay, so that said, we do have a study guide. Here it is, midterm 2. So we have a study guide posted first page. We have my usual tips on how to take online and remote exams. I will put this video that here onto this, into this module as a page as well. And it will also appear in your announcements. So you'll see that once I've finished recording myself. So now, when we open up the study guide, you can download it here and print it out, which I recommend doing if you have a printer, or go into the student learning center and see if you can print it out. If not, it's okay. Ideally, you can have maybe a second screen or split your screen so you can see the study guide and the module at the same time. There's basic information here that is the same as your first exam, but what I want to remind you is that part 1 of the exam is testing you on specific information, true, false, multiple choice, and image identification. So it's going to test you on concepts relating to key terms in our class. So you should go through these terms and make sure you know the definitions. And it's set up so that you can go right back to week 4. And if you don't know a definition, then you can find it. I try to resist the impulse of going to online tools, knowledge tools, whatever they may be, rather than our Canvas module. I know that's tempting because we all are kind of mentally conditioned to do Google searches or even now AI searches for some of us quickly. And all of these tools are great, but they can be also destructive to your learning because they're not always precise. They're not always relating to the context of the material that's in our class. So it's better to dedicate your energy to using the module itself. So make sure you know these terms. Some of these terms come directly from the module pages. Some of them are coming out of my videos. So you'll want to, and those videos do have PowerPoints attached that you can review, but the videos themselves contain oral information from your instructor that you need to listen to and be aware of to be able to understand all of these terms properly. Now, I can't emphasize enough the importance of knowing the small number of works of art that I've listed that you should know. You must be able to recognize and know what each of the works of art that I have listed under each module study heading here in this guide, because some of them will appear as identification on your exam. And students who are relying on last minute studying or searching or whatever you're doing that's not optimal will miss these. So even if you are not prioritizing this class, go and learn these images. And then at least you won't lose a lot of time trying to figure out what the image identification is on the exam and leave the exam incomplete. Of course, you ideally studying all the material, but I know some of you are in different places. So each week is organized terms, works of art. Week 5 has more works of art. Remember, you studied the Jain imagery, the wonderful jinas in Jain temples, and you also studied the first examples of Buddhist art, beginning with the Emperor Ashoka and those pillars, as well as the earliest representations of Buddha, both aniconic, meaning not showing the body of Buddha, but showing Buddha through non-representational signs, as well as ultimately representing the body of Buddha. So you should look at these images. This particular module is heavier on images because unlike the prior period, the Vedic period, where we have far fewer objects and much more literary material, the Vedas, this is a period where we're looking at images. So you should make sure you know them. Some of them look quite alike, so be mindful of that. Week 6 is the ritual and artistic development of Hinduism. This is a really, wonderful. I love all my material, but this is a wonderful way in which you can see how ideas get synthesized into what we call Hinduism. So what we see is the Vedic texts, elements of new literature like the Bhagavad Gita, and even in some way the implications of Buddhism a little, they all kind of like become part of this much more broad cultural and religious belief system and way of life that we call Hinduism. So you should make sure you know the terms, and again, know the sculptures that I've listed, and know the how they're what to which if they're which Hindu god they are related to, and so forth. And you should also know several architectural forms as well. So the Lakshmana temple, the Shore temple, these are Hindu temples. Be very clear about whatever particularly the Hindu temples look very alike. And some students try to use Google search in the exam because they have not prepared and invariably get the wrong temple. And then it shows me that you haven't worked in our module. It shows me that you're not actually using the course properly, and that impacts your grade. I know only a few of you may do that, and I don't mean to suggest that I assume you all are, but I'm thinking I want to catch all of you, and so I highlight that. Now, the last is week 7, Introduction to Islam and Islam in India. And this introduces a brand new Abrahamic religion coming out of the Middle East. It's very, very different than the Indic religion, Jainism, Buddhism, and Hinduism, which is based on the Vedic text and a fundamental concept of samsara, the reincarnation of the soul, or the Atman in Hinduism. And in the case of Buddhism, there is no soul that stays stable through reincarnations, but there's a process of moving endlessly through rebirth. And one's life in a Buddhist position, a place, is to awaken to the reality of something beyond these cycles of reincarnation, and awaken to a way of life that leads to liberation from it. Islamic is a very different conceptions here of an afterlife, of preparation for an afterlife. And unfortunately, we can't go into it too deeply. It's really linked to the development. It leads into, is preceded by Christianity and Judaism. So we call these Abrahamic faiths. Islam is so important in Asia because it's moving into India through the Mughal Empire, and even earlier in the Deccan, and it moves into Southeast Asia as well. And in Islamic belief and culture is profoundly influential in Southeast Asia and in the north of India, in particular in Pakistan and Afghanistan. So you will find, and so you need to be kind of really taking time to kind of wrap your head around this very different kind of belief system, and then enjoy how we find it flowering in India, in the Mughal Empire in particular. And we touch on Persia and Persian culture in this module as well. So you really, though there are not that many vocabulary terms here, and not that many works of art, you need to study them closely to understand how they're very distinct from what we've looked at in the prior modules, and how they come into India and are shaped by the visual and cultural traditions that are well developed in India when Islam enters. So hopefully that's helpful to you all. The exam, I remind you, let's go to now the quiz page itself. I'm going to leave student view for a moment so you can actually see what the exam looks like when it opens up. You can't see it right now until it's actually open. We're going to go to quizzes here. So for you, you don't see what I see because it will not open until Friday. But I want to kind of quickly remind you, you're going to work through the exam page by page, and you'll need to be sure to remember the last question on the exam is an extra credit. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of studying for that extra credit exam. The midterm study guide is linked also to in the exam itself. And now, having kind of placed you in the exam, I want to remind you that the last part of your study guide, the last two parts, are based on once again, organized sequentially, week 4, week 5, week 6, and week 7, you have a series of short answer questions you should be prepared to answer. And that's kind of comes into the second part of your exam. So make sure that some of these questions will appear exactly as they appear in your study guide. Some of them are related. All of these questions will help you with the first part as well. So be sure you know the answers to these questions or where you can find the answers as you're studying. If you find a question is not clear, maybe your instructor made a mistake. Maybe there's a better way for me to ask a question. Do not hesitate to write to me and ask for help. It doesn't mean that you're not studying. I love when students come to me with questions. So write to me or ask to meet with me if you have any questions or concerns about the exam study guide. Finally, part 3, this is the part where you really can prepare in advance. You should do this now, this starting in the next day or two. You are going to need to have an outline or even written out an essay answer to 2 of the options for each of the long answers. So here we have, and they should be about the length of your think pieces, not very long, but showing that you're responding. So you can see here, I've given you for your compare and contrast. You have opportunities to compare the hymn of creation from the Rig Veda with the Great Forest Upanishad, also known as the Brihad Ayaka Upanishad, which was part of your hypothesis assignment and also discussed in your module, on week 4 module. You will these are 2 great texts. One is this ancient hymn of creation, the Rig Veda, the oldest Veda, and shows very particular concerns that are relating to the period or the developmental stage of the Vedic people and their ways of life. And the kinds of questions the Rig Veda is asking relate to that. The Upanishads are written very late in relative to what we call the Vedic period. They're late texts. Many, many years have passed between the early and the late. Hundreds of years have passed. And so by the time the Upanishads are being written, the Vedic people have changed. They have settled. They have developed organized kind of kingdoms that are clan-based, and they're still somewhat tribal, but we see strong signs of civilization. We have language, we have government, we have very rigid priest orders, and so forth. So the Upanishads are a text that relates to a much more settled society, and the questions they ask reveal concerns of a society where a lot of basic needs are met, and there's a much greater settled order. So think about that question in relation to the module material if you choose to write about this comparison. The option number 2 is to create an imaginative conversation between Gautama Siddhartha after enlightenment and Krishna's teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. For those of you who are watching this video and wonder if I'm going to talk about anything after these questions, I'm not. So if you have already read these questions and you're clear what they mean, you can check out now. But for those of you who would like kind of a walkthrough of the questions, stay with me. So here, question number 2, again, for your compare and contrast, is create an imaginative conversation between Gautama Siddhartha, that is the historical Buddha, the man who became Buddha, who had that moment of enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. And imagine a conversation between Gautama Siddhartha after enlightenment and Krishna as he appears to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. There are similarities between the belief systems that each represent. One is deeply a part of Hinduism and was discussed in your module on the ritual and artistic development of Hinduism. And one is foundational to Buddhism. It's important that you show how both of these beliefs are coming from some common premises established in the Upanishads. Significantly, this concept of reincarnation, but they approach the nature of reincarnation and the soul quite differently. And you need to look at the module pages to be sure you understand that. In Buddhism or in Hinduism, we have Atman. The Atman is very stable, right? It moves through bodies and is a very like a solid thread, a metaphysical thread of the soul. Buddhism has a very different idea of the idea of self at all, or the non-self. Be sure you get that in the module pages, because that can help you develop a kind of series of, maybe 5 statements or so of Gautama talking about the nature of reality, what kinds of issues confront a soul or the self, and how to be freed from these cycles of reincarnation. So read the question carefully and ask yourself, would you like to write a dialogue? And that could be a fun and engaging way for you to work with the material. You may also have the option of being presented with 2 slides drawn from the images listed above here. And remember these image lists, works of art and architecture. So several of the options. And mind you, you're not going to have to answer all of these. These are options. So if you prepare 2 of the 4 here, you will be ready for the 3 that appear. So 3 out of the 4 will appear as options on your exam, and you will write an essay on 1. So if you prepare 2, you're ready. If you want to do a comparison, a slide comparison, you need to be sure you're really clear on the objects listed in the image list above and what kinds of sculptures and temples are Jain, or sorry, just sculpture here, Jain, and what are Hindu. Hindu gods like Vishnu, for example. We've looked at Vishnu, we've looked at Shiva, we've looked at mother goddesses, we've looked at Brahma, not to be confused with Brahmin, which is the ultimate reality. Brahma is a god. So you should have seen those sculptures in the videos a few weeks ago. You should know how they look differently from Jain sculptures. And thinking about how a Jain devotee would approach a sculpture in a Jain temple versus how a Hindu devotee would enter into a Hindu temple and approach an image. They are very different. Both sculptural forms may look quite alike in some cases. That's because they're developing in a visual context where shared ideas exist. But the devotee's approach and relationship to the image, the sculpture, is very different in Jain and in Hindu. And if you want to answer this question, you need to understand that and be able to talk about it. Similarly, you could choose to write, you will have a Mughal garden and perhaps a structure related to it, like a moonlight temple, like the Taj Mahal, something from Lahore. This is part of the magnificent Islamic Mughal gardens, pronounced Mughal or Mughal, in your last module. And you will be asked to compare it to a Hindu temple and think about how one is reflecting Islamic and maybe Persian ideas about the garden, paradise garden, but both Persian is coming from an Islamic belief system. So don't to understand that. We didn't go into much depth into Persia, but Persia is sitting within the Islamic belief system. And they have a magnificent tradition of paradise gardens. And so you need to be able to understand how the Mughal garden reflects Islam and the influences of garden design coming out of the Central Asia's love of Persian gardens. And that should be clear in the module pages. Even if you're not totally clear on that, you should be able to recognize a Mughal garden, and you should be able to say, what kind of paradise is the Mughal garden referring to? It's not Brahman in Hinduism, is it? It's referring to a paradise that is established in the Islamic belief system and is discussed in Islamic texts. So be sure you understand that. And again, be sure you understand the Hindu temple. And so you'll be presented with a Hindu temple and a Mughal garden and or mausoleum or structure, all drawn from the images listed above that you need to know. So there are not that many, and you need to be able to be prepared to write a paragraph or two that is focused and clear about these structures. Context. So long answer number one is really about compare and contrast. You're really comparing and contrasting two different traditions, cultures, and finding points of similarity and points of difference. The context and connections is really to locate a work of art or a concept or a text in relation to a specific context, a cultural context, a religious context. And we've really been working on these important Indic religions, as well as Islam, as foundational to our course. So these are going to be significant context, but not the only context. So you could talk about the great stupa of Sanchi and what is its context? What is the devotee's relationship to it? What kinds of artistic expressions do we find on it? And how does it relate to the context in which it was created, both historically in India and religiously in India? And also, what is a stupa, and what is that? What does it signify? You could talk about the artistic representation, how Buddha evolved in India. Do not confuse this with ideas of Buddhism in general. It's about how Buddha is physically represented or not represented, but referred to through other kinds of representation, like footsteps, like an umbrella with no one under it. You review the material in week 5 and to be sure you understand these early developments of Buddha's body. First, Buddha's body is absent, and then Buddha's body becomes present in sculptural form. And you need to understand and show me that you understand the difference between the two types and can give me a few examples drawn from the module or drawn from the works of art listed as in the image lists above. Similarly, you could talk about the ways in which the god Shiva is represented in Hindu sculpture. The artistic ritual and artistic development of Hinduism page, week number 6, presents you in the lecture videos with very dramatically different representations of the god Shiva, the Hindu god Shiva, both in a phallic form and also in a really magnificent cosmic destroyer and creator dance form. If you haven't watched the videos, then you should do so immediately and make sure you understand what this means, and that will be valuable for other parts of the exam as well. For option number 5, you could contextualize the Mughal garden, and I've already talked about that in relation to the compare and contrast. So you'd want to contextualize it in relationship to Mughal religious beliefs, texts that might be influencing the Mughal garden. What kind of experience are you expected to have in a Mughal garden? What kinds of sounds, what kinds of textures, what kind of light, what kind of smells? You really want to go into the pages on the Mughal garden and dream along with me of being there and walking through these amazing spaces that we find landscape and architecture kind of synthesis in these beautiful, beautiful Mughal gardens that we see up in the north of India, especially in the Kashmir region, in what is present-day Pakistan, and so forth. Now, lastly, if you loved the lecture on the Celestial Dancer in my lecture, and you also enjoyed learning about Indian dance, you can relate the video on Indian dance to my discussion, the lecture video discussion on the Celestial Dancer from a Hindu temple, and talk about how the sculpted body, the Celestial Dancer, is relating to what an actual Indian dance and dancer is supposed to do and is understood to be doing in a Hindu temple. Hint, remember the concept of bhakti and devotion and loving devotion. So I hope that you, instead of being nervous and worried, you are calm and deliberate and decide what you want to write about and start now and prepare at least an outline. Again, some students write quite long essays. Some students write that are very well done and very relevant. Some put in a lot of filler. Some clearly attempt to use online knowledge tools, and they just throw in a lot of material that's extremely obvious to me, and you won't get any credit. A short paragraph that shows you are grappling and working with this material will earn a much higher grade than a long page where you're just cobbling together what you find, maybe copying and pasting from my module, maybe from the internet. You need to show you're working with the material. And short is fine. A paragraph, if it's very focused, is just fine. Say the length of a think piece. Longer is fine too. Our minds are all different. Sometimes some of us need to say more to get out what we want to say, and that's fine. I was such a student. Some of you are very kind of focused thinkers, but in all cases, you need to show that you really are working with these questions, and that's how you're learning and integrating this course material. And as you can see from the overall study guide, we're working really from specific multiple choice test style to more general short answer questions, right? And then finally, diving into a more embodied, synthesized engagement through your own writing. So hopefully that's clear. And I want to finally, one last tip, I'll go back to the quiz here. And I'm going to set this up like a preview so you can see what it's going to look like here. This is what the exam will look like when you open it. Now, on the right, you can see there are questions. All of our questions are here. Question 32 is your compare and contrast question. Question 33 is the context and analysis, and question 34 is extra credit. So if you should have prepared 2 possible essay answers for each of the last 2 long answer questions, and so you have the option of showing me what else you prepared by putting it in extra credit. And I can then look at that in relation to your overall exam performance and give you extra credit and calibrate your exam. It can really change your grade, especially if you're not good at multiple choice questions and you really struggle. You won't get any extra credit if, of course, whatever you copy and paste or place there is clearly coming from not your voice, and you're just rushing and just kind of scrambling material together, then you won't get any credit, or very, very little. So you might want to start the exam by completing questions 32, 33, and 34, because these are the questions you can really prepare in advance. Sometimes what happens is students start naturally at question 1, which they appear right down here. And I've deliberately put in a question here this is not a question on your exam. This is a question that would be on a different exam. But imagining this was a question on your exam, you'd complete question 1 and then click to question 2. But remember, you have this sidebar. And in some cases, you might bog down on these multiple choice and lose a lot of time. And they're only worth small amounts of points each question. So to avoid running out of time, you might want to make sure you put in your longer, heavier pointed question answers at the beginning and get that out of the way. because that you can have prepared in advance, and it's worth a significant portion of your exam. And I will fix this. Right here it says 50 points, but I will adjust this to be 45, 40, 40. Your exam is not worth 150 points. It's worth 125 points. So that's an adjustment I need to make in this. So you can ignore that. But again, the last part of your exam is very important. You have a time clock right here. You'll have 3 hours. As you can see here, it's due at October 20th at 11:59 p.m. If you start, although you shouldn't, at 10 p.m. on October 20th, Sunday night, and give yourself 2 hours and find 2 hours have passed and it's now almost 11:59 p.m. and you have not finished the exam, you should finish the exam until the time runs out. It is better to finish the exam a little over time than it is to submit with incomplete sections. You will lose far fewer points that way. So but of course, you're not going to get, if 3 hours is 3 hours and it doesn't extend beyond that. And so hopefully that's clear. Again, if you have any questions or concerns, please talk to me. I'm happy to help you, happy to support you in any way I can. Most of all, my goal is to make you enjoy learning. And I also want to make sure that what you're learning in the class and the time you're investing stays with you and becomes an embodied part of your life. That's my dream and my hope. I know that many of you are just like, I just want to pass this class. And I understand, I was in the same place, but you can do both. You can do both if you approach this exam through the guidance that I've given you. All right, good luck everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful remainder of your week.